Hey, everybody, this is Kenny. Welcome back to another edition of the Leading from the Middle podcast. This is the podcast for middle managers who want to develop themselves, develop their teams, and improve their results. I got to speak to a great leader the other day, Chief Encouragement Officer, Heart Centered Executive Coach. Deb Crowe joined me. And Deb is exactly what her title says. She's an encourager. She's a heart-centered leader. But what does that really mean? Deb goes way into it and talks about how we all can do that and how it can lead to really long-term success. How do you also be truly inclusive on your teams? You don't want to miss a second of this important conversation. Let's get at it.
This episode is brought to you by Kitcaster. Kitcaster books you on top podcasts. How do funded startup founders attract prospects and talent? Podcast interviews. How do entrepreneurs with exits find new deals? Podcast interviews. How do C-suite execs differentiate in crowded markets? Podcast interviews. Kitcaster books you on top podcasts. Click the link in the show notes for a special offer. Celebrate good conversation.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of the Leading from the Middle podcast. I just am so excited to have this conversation with this terrific leader today and really talk about heart-centered leadership, something that was, no pun intended, near and dear to my heart, because I really felt like over the years, that's how I've always led. And it was such a validation to listen to this leader and hear her advice. So let's just get right to it. Chief Encouragement Officer, I love that. Heart-centered Executive Coach, Deb Crowe has joined me today. Deb, it is so great to have you on. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Kenny. Thanks so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, well, thank you. I want to jump right in because I want to make sure we take full advantage of all of your great knowledge and expertise. But I want to get your backstory first because I just have a feeling that there was some things probably throughout your career and your background that had you stick with this lane of being a heart-centered leader. So tell us about your background and what drew you to making this really the heart of what you do every day.
Well, it's in my book, so I'll give you a little sneak peek. There's a whole chapter in my book that's dedicated to my Irish Nana.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I spent a lot of time with her as a child. I grew up with a patch on my eye, so I was the recipient of much bullying in elementary. And my Nana taught me that I can always control me. I can control who I am, how I think. From a tender age of 8, I can remember it was grade 2. And she said, not everyone's going to appreciate your light. Not everyone's going to like you, but you can always look after you. And when you treat people the way you want to be treated, you'll never go astray. So for me, that was a lesson in emotional intelligence, emotional resilience. And as I became older and started working, heart-centered leadership really is fostering that. And that's the values and kind of belief system that my Nana gave me at an early age. And I've certainly had many decades of experience on both sides of the coin. And I always know that I can control me and what I do and what I say and how I process and react to things. And I think when we master that, that's truly mastering what I say as the subtitle of my book. Mastering the art of heart in our life and leadership is exactly that.
That's amazing, Deb. And I love that story that from such an early age, that you got it and you took your Nana's, lessons with you. Before we dive into what heart-centered leadership is, were there times in your career, or maybe name a specific time where you got thrown off from it? And here's why I ask. There were a lot of times in my career that I did get thrown off, that I had, a leader above me say, yeah, stop thinking with your heart. You got to make this decision with your head. And it caused me to pivot. And I never liked the way that felt. Were there some times where that happened to you?
It did. So again, I got to pull a story out of the book. My dad passed away when I was in my second year of post-secondary education at
Mm.
university. And again, that emotional resilience had to be the foundation of where I was going to go now, because I really didn't have any parental guidance. My mom was very sick. My dad was gone. I had to drop out of school. So my strategy was, why don't I go work for temporary agencies? Because I had lots of skills. I was self-taught on the computer. I worked in my dad's business. So I was very strong with finance and administration duties. And I wanted to just have a rich level of experience in as many sectors as I could
Mhm.
over 3 years. And I did that from 21 to 24. And to answer your question, I'd get to the end of my 3 months. And if there was going to be a job, I'd always go into that 3 month review with excitement.
Mm.
And I'd be sitting across the table from my boss, and they would say, "It's just not working." And I would go through the checklist in my mind. I came in early, I stayed late. My dad always taught me not to be a clock watcher. My desk was clean, I was a team player, I listened. And it was the last job that I was at that I realized, from the VP of technology, I was working for him. And they were restructuring that division. And he said, "I'm going to move you over to the head office branch to work with the other 4 girls, because I don't want to lay you off. And you have great transferable skills." So off I go. I'm all excited. I wasn't greeted with a welcome mat. I wasn't greeted with kindness. And I worked really hard for the next 90 days because, again, I was supporting myself. I needed the job. And I wasn't in a happy environment with women who were happy to have me there.
Mhm.
And I ran around, and to be gregarious all day, I was told I'm too smiley, too shiny, I laugh too much, I talk too much. It didn't matter. And it's actually called tall poppy syndrome, and it's in my book. And the VP took me out for lunch, and he looked across the table and he said, "I need you to look at me and I need you to listen." And he said, "You're losing your job at 5 o'clock, but I wanted to tell you it's nothing you've done." And he's like, "You need to go start your own business." So I lost my job at the end of April in 1990, and May 30th, 1990, I started my business. And here I am 33 and a half years later.
Wow. Wow. I I love that response, right? Okay. Thank you for that advice. Here we go. Um, so Deb, tell us what exactly is heart-centered leadership? Let's start there.
So, heart centered leadership, my definition is honoring your connection with people.
Mm.
So, what does that mean? It means holding space like you and I are doing right now. We're not thinking about where did our morning go? What are we having for dinner? Did we leave the dryer on? And I'm being facetious, but I'm also being real, because when you're not listening to someone, those nonverbal cues can be picked up, and people pick up your energy. Or someone, when you're having lunch, they pick up their cell phone. So it's such an opportunity that you're missing out on missed opportunities that could further create more trust, more rapport. And there's never room for reciprocity. It's not that what's in it for me. "Hey, Kenny, you did this for me. What can I do for you?" It's just being a decent human being and holding that space and being present.
No, I love that. Absolutely. I remember working for a leader before, at the very early days of Sprint, before we got really overwhelmed, with our phones, our laptops, our tablets. And I remember when he'd have a one-on-one with me, there was nothing on his desk. He would put his laptop away, his phone away, and those days seem to be gone. What are some hints and tips though to be so present in that moment that you are making that connection? I guess those are a couple, right? Putting everything away. How else can we really be in that moment?
Well, I come from a medical background, and I'm also trained in grief and bereavement. So one of the things that we do, and I think this lends as a transferable modality for your question. So if you and I were going to talk to each other, again, nothing that beeps, buzzes, any of that is even present. It's you and I, my desk is clean, so that you know that I have made a concerted effort to make the environment exactly what you need it to be. And I never sit across directly from someone. It's always off to an angle. So I always had a separate table when I had my clinic, a round table, so that I could sit on an angle and it wasn't straight, which can kind of give off that negative confrontational vibe to a lot of people. It was more casual, sitting back in our chair and just really being present and listening. It's not about me. You're there to talk to me about whatever's on your mind, and having that heart mind alignment is so hard for people. And I've met many, many people across the globe who have gone through a similar experience to you, where they were told, think with your head, not with your heart.
Mm-hmm.
That whole profit over people mentality.
Yeah.
And I'm really looking to invert that fraction, because there are no metrics, there are no KPIs unless you invest in your people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And you're going down a path that I want to ask you about, is how does that then translate into, I mean, I know it does, but how can we really hold on tangibly and translate the heart-centered leadership into long-term success? How does that translate into long-term success for us?
So it's like anything else. It's like riding a bike. Consistency,
Yes.
a high level of self-awareness, and the ability to allow yourself to fail forward and model that for your team and organization at large.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I love it. Love it. I want to ask you about decision making, and how is heart-centered leadership factor in when it comes to making tough decisions, or just day in and day out decisions? Where does that factor in at? Do you lead with that?
Well, I always ask middle management to sit in the observer's chair for anybody that's above them in a leadership position. So let's talk about a CEO as a good example. They have a tsunami of information coming at them on any given day, all day long, and sometimes nanoseconds to make a decision or delegate. So intuition management is a big factor in all levels of leadership. We have to go with our gut, because there's science around this, there's research around this. Our stomach is attached to our brain. So when you get those whispers of this doesn't feel good, or this isn't who I am, it's okay to go against the grain, but not have a systematic approach to agree to disagree. End the meeting with a resolution, even if it's partial and there's action steps. That way it's a win-win for everybody. And to me, I think thought leadership should be an open bandwidth for the organization at large. And I think all levels of leadership should learn for each other and with each other. And I think that's the biggest extension of heart-centered leadership that we can show and give, regardless of what our role, responsibility, title, stature is.
Yeah, I love what you said there. And I know there's a lot of leaders probably that's going to listen that are saying that they want to lead in this way, and there's so many barriers, obstacles that sometimes come from up above. And one of the myths, Deb, that I'd love you to dispel is, because I was told this before, you lead with your heart, man. Your team is just going to think you soft, that you just can't make a tough decision because you're thinking too much with your heart. Dispel that. I know it's a myth. Could you dispel that a little bit for us?
It's assertive leadership. That's what you're talking about. It's assertive leadership, transformational leadership. I have created 2 courses that I teach at our local college. We can say hard things and still be nice.
Yeah.
We can make hard decisions and still be nice. The last line of my introduction of my book is, you don't need initials after your name to be kind.
Yeah.
So if we remove all the extrinsic stuff from this conversation and the systematic approach, there's always room for heart-centered leadership. There are many heart-centered leaders around the globe who have led and have had record profits navigating through COVID. It all comes down to how that leader leads and how they choose to lead. That's when you see the outcome and the true fruition of heart-centered leadership at its best.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so what are some still barriers out there that you've broken it down so greatly, and it makes 100% sense. And I'm so glad, like I said, watching you, listening to you, really validated a lot that's happened in my career and it's still happening. What are still some barriers there that you find that leaders still don't get it?
It comes back to self-awareness,
Hmm.
and it's two-pronged. It's their own leadership journey, which is their life journey. It's episodic or situational, and it's been modeled to them and they've never questioned it. And until they're willing to tap into that self-awareness and not see it as soft, unnecessary, or that it won't work, they're not leaving room to grow themselves as a leader. And a
Hmm.
heart-centered leader is so grounded and has such a high level of self-awareness that they're almost untouchable because they don't let anything waver their own habits of thinking.
Wow. I love that. Absolutely. Absolutely. I want to go back to your career for a second. And if you would, I love the way it began. It's an amazing story. And you are a storyteller at heart. I love it. I'd love to ask you about some successes and failures early on because you got this at such a young age. Were there times where you scratched your head after, May of 1990 and said, wait a second, what am I doing? you know, but then also I'd love to hear some really huge successes from you. But let's talk about some of those times where there was maybe a little bit of doubt.
So it wasn't so much doubt as sometimes it was, I'm going to say, timing.
Timing. Okay.
So the first customer that I got in my own business was the Australian Department of Defense. And I got to set up their office inside General Dynamics in my city for their light armored vehicle program. You could have pinched me, you could have knocked me over. And I was interviewed by the colonel. I was handed a sheet that was full of hardware and software. I was teaching at our local college. I was all self-taught, and I was teaching DOS and Unix, which existed before Windows.
Yes, I remember.
And I remember my dad saying to me before he passed away was, don't ever shortchange yourself that you don't know something. We all have working knowledge to everything, and we have transferable skills. So I'm looking at this list and I knew everything on it except the last piece of software. And I thought, okay, I could buy this software, install it, and I'd be able to get through it when I started. So I didn't lie to the colonel. I said to him, I have a proficiency with everything on this list except this last piece of software. I have a working knowledge and I feel confident in my ability that I could be up and running with this. If I land up getting the contract with you, I feel successful. I feel like I could do it and the confidence is there. And I went up against 6 men for this position. I got that job because of that last sentence about that one piece of software. And he told me that. He said, you're the only one that knew the whole list, but he said, you were vulnerable and authentic enough to say, I don't know this fully. I have a working knowledge. And that's how I started. And
Yeah.
it's not so much a failure, but I was also developing curriculum at that time in the day school for the college. And I didn't get to teach the first intake because I was becoming a mom with my daughter. So I was exhilarated to become a mom, but I felt a little sad because I had created this new course and it was all about the year 2000 when the world was going to end and technology. And there was so much laughter around it. But I was sad because it was kind of my first baby, if you will, metaphorically, before I physically became a mom.
Yes.
But it's still existing to this day. And I know I don't really have failures. I have abilities where I have failed forward because I would rather try something and put my own thought leadership out there than not wish and perseverate on something that I wish I coulda, woulda, shoulda. I would
Mhm.
rather fail, learn, try again. And I have done that consecutively for 33 years. I mean, I came from the medical world. I never dreamed that I'd land up in coaching. I really did not see myself finishing my business. And this is really my legacy years of work. But I'm always open and I'm always listening and watching. And I believe we get these gentle taps on our shoulder to say, I think you need to come over here. And they don't always make sense, but I never question it. And I've really strengthened my own intuition management over the last 33 and a half years, for sure.
Wow, that's a great story. I love that. That's a great story. And here you probably were thinking, I probably just blew it, but I had to be honest, and you get it by being honest and being vulnerable and saying, I don't know it, but I'm gonna learn it, and probably everybody else said, yeah, I got all of them, Um, that is so awesome. One more question from me. This has been amazing. For heart-centered leadership, as I was going through a lot of your stuff, this came to mind for me that there's still the gap between managing and leading. And I felt like, hey, you probably have a really good answer to how does this fall into now bridging that gap? Because there's still a lot of leaders I come across that, no, I got to manage. I got to manage my people. I got to tell them what to do exactly. And okay, I got you. How does this kind of bridge that gap to make us more leaders than managers?
I don't think I'm going to bridge the gap. I think I'm going to give you distinct descriptions.
Okay.
All of us are leaders. Our title, stature, role, responsibility does not equate to our own self-awareness, worth and worthiness, our identity. Leaders lead people. Managers get succumbed with tasks and forget that people are achieving them. And the leaders that lean in and micromanage, they need to tap into self-awareness, and they need to let go of ego, narcissistic behavior. And you hire people because they have skills and abilities to do the job that you hired them for. So when you lead them, you let them go, you foster them with heart-centered leadership. When they fail, you say, tell me your thought process in the most positive and genuine way, so that you can get into their mindset and lead them to be even better than they were when they started your project or task. That is the distinct difference.
It sure is. Wow. I mean, you put it right there, man. That is so awesome, and that's gonna stay with us for a while, forever for me. I mean, that's awesome. Um, how does this tie in? Because you talk about being truly inclusive, and I see a lot of companies that are, but I also see a lot of companies that it's almost like window dressing, so to speak, right? Where does this tie in with if you really truly want to be inclusive? Talk a little about that.
If you truly want to be inclusive, behave your brand.
Hmm.
Don't give me a glossy brochure or paint it on the beautiful wall walking into your office. Don't give me the extrinsic and systemic values, and then don't not bring the intrinsic forward. So to me, if you're going to say that you have a diverse, equal, and inclusive culture, demonstrate it, not to look pretty. And I say that respectfully. I see it a lot. I have worked for 2 companies that I've actually left for that exact reason. Don't say you're heart-centered and then not be heart-centered. That's like me saying, Kenny, my door is always open, I'm approachable, yet my physical door is always closed.
Yeah.
It happens.
Yeah.
So it's kind of that alignment of say what you mean and then do it. Don't just have it be verbose, non-emotional language coming out of your mouth. Mean what you say and then honor it with your behavior. Because when you don't, you're not being a heart-centered leader. You're not honoring that connection. You're telling me what I want to hear, but then you don't give me the behavior and the leadership to augment and make me a better leader.
Absolutely. Wow. Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. I want to ask you about the Women's Self-Care Conference Series. Give you time to talk about that. What is that about?
So I started that back in 2018, and I was doing a ton of life coaching. It was almost like 50-50 life coaching to executive coaching. And women felt guilt, shame, and remorse for not taking self-care.
Mm.
I was coming at it from a place when I case managed short-term disability claims, when corporate wellness meant mitigating short-term disability claims. And I thought to myself, this is long before COVID. We need to put corporate wellness at the forefront and look after our people and show leaders that they can model self-care, and not because you need to take a day, but you can take a day and you want to take a day. So it was more of a self-directed approach than an obligation. So I started it in Toronto. I'd never have it in my own city because you don't want to do something new in your own backyard. And I was dumbfounded how fast it sold out. And
Mm.
then in 2019, we took it across Canada and it sold out, brought it back to my own city. We sold out on the pre-sale and we were ready for the next kind of round 2 going again across Canada. And then COVID hit.
Yeah.
And the beauty of COVID is self-care rose to the surface all on its own because people had
Good.
time to pause. Leaders had time to pause and look at everything. And people that were complacent were no longer in their roles.
Mhm.
CEOs had time to take self-care and really look at everything, but families got to really do a self-audit and realize self-care isn't selfish and we need to do it in the forefront. I've been asked if I'm going to bring the conference series back. The question right now is, I don't know. I have a lot going on. Maybe someday. If anything, I feel like I had a small part in bringing corporate wellness to the forefront and not have it be looked at as looking after your people once they're sick, but looking after them while they are well and keeping them well.
Yeah. That's so awesome. And you had more than a small part, I'm sure. Um, Deb, is it, and I hear my heart on this question because I just, it's always been a little bit foreign to me, even though I've seen it in front of my eyes at times. Is there still a big difference in the gap between men and women needing that self-care?
You know what? I don't honestly know how to answer that question. I think depending again on their own life journey and leadership journey and who's had influence on them, I
Mhm.
don't think it's gender specific anymore. And
Mm.
I think the people that get it are getting it early and they're not getting it after they get sick and realizing I shoulda, woulda, coulda, and now look at where I
Mm.
am. I
Mm.
think people are making this a proactive lifestyle decision because I talk about it in my book. Life shows up in our work and work shows up in our life.
Yes.
And it's not about balance, it's about integration. And that was the whole premise of my self-care women's conference.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I loved everything you said. But that work-life integration, I think it's so important because we still say work-life balance, but you know,
It's a
Deb, this
myth.
has, yeah, yeah, absolutely right. This has been amazing. I want to give you now time. Talk a little bit about your books. I think you have 4 books. Am I right there?
I have co-authored 4,
Okay.
and my new book, The Heart-Centered Leadership, is my first solo book. And we just had our official launch last Wednesday, November 1st.
Wow. Wow. Well, congratulations on that. Talk a little bit more about it.
So this book has been a labor of love. And I realized coming out of COVID that the book really needed to be finished and written. And my goal for the book is that it helps to heal the world in some small way. And I think every time I educate and get more heart-centered leaders out there, I think it's going to have a ripple effect on the world, which I think is a good thing right now.
Of course. Oh my gosh. Yes. That is so awesome. So how can folks then connect with you and how can they get your book and
So
the other
my
3 as well? Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is debcrowe.com. That's probably the easiest. All my socials are on there. My book is on all the major digital places you'd find it: Amazon, Kobo, Barnes and Noble, etc.
Mhm.
And yeah, I'm really, really proud of this book. I'm still kind of in awe that the book is done and out, and it's been a very cathartic experience to hold my own book in my own hands, and I'm really proud of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That is so awesome. And Deb, I've got one last question that I want to leave the audience with, and that'll all be in the show notes as well. A new emerging leader, the 19, 20, 21-year-old that really aspires to lead people and really wants to take this specific lane. What's one quick piece of advice that you have for them?
To never doubt their dreams.
Yeah.
To never lose their awe and wonder as they grow and gain experience and maturity. Think big and act fast, even if you don't have everything figured out. At least you're going to move that dream 1 millimeter forward. You can always correct, change, and lean into your intuition, because it's going to be one of the best tools in your toolkit to be a heart-centered leader.
Gonna leave it there, folks. Deb, that was awesome. Thank you so much. And you know, nothing but success with your book. I hope it sells like crazy. And you talk about stuff that leaders really need here in 2023 and beyond, for sure. So we're gonna leave it there, folks. This has been Kenny and Deb. This has been the Leading from the Middle podcast. We'll talk to you real soon.